Hey, what up, everybody? This is Stevie Reach coming to you here today. Like a lot of other people out there in the world, I listen to a lot of wrestling podcasts. I listen to a lot of regular podcasts. It's an easy way to get throughout the day. I listen to them in the car, on the way to work, on the way home. I listen to them on my lunch at work, and I always find that they're a really good way to get through the day. And I've got a list of my top 5 wrestling podcasts that I listen to. I made this video probably 2 years ago, and since then, I've changed up my listening a little bit. There's a few names that got kicked into the honorary mentions. There's a few that have switched positions inside of the top 5, and so I just wanted to update it for you guys. So maybe you guys could go over to iTunes and subscribe to some more wrestling podcasts that you might not know about, or you might not have a feeling about. But as quick plugs to get it off, the honorary mentions is the Ric Flair podcast, which is through CBS Sports. I think that this is a rising star, and I wanted to put this in my top 5. He gets a lot of really good interviews. He just had Darius Rucker on there talking about his life as a professional wrestling fan, as well as being a singer. Ric Flair was friends with Darius Rucker before Hootie and the Blowfish blew up. So these guys are like longtime friends. They tell a cool story about Darius Rucker buying the really famous Ric Flair robe, which is the black, gray, and silverish white one that he wore at the Rumble that he won, I believe, in 1992. Fun stuff about that. The Art of Wrestling with Cole Cabana is always going to be a fan favorite. I found out about this one WrestleMania 27 weekend, and even though I don't listen to it as often as I once did, he always has really good podcasts, and even when you don't think the guest is going to be somebody that's going to knock your socks off, he normally gets a really good interview out of him and a really good story. The Ross Report is a show that honestly I don't listen to as often, but he always pulls in some pretty good guests. The Ross Report to me honestly just comes off a little bit too slow. So that's why it's not one of my favorites. And the Chris Jericho podcast, week after week, this guy knocks it out with good guests. And normally I didn't put this in my top 5 because I normally use this as a backup show, where I do download these, but I don't really go back and listen to them until somebody tells me that the show honestly is really, really good. But the last one I listened to that was really good was the Freddie Prinze Jr. one, talking about his days in WWE as one of the producers. Really, really fun stuff. Number 5 on my list is going to be The Law. And a lot of what ranks these as shows is I don't really give it to just the podcast, but the amount of content that the subscription gives you when you subscribe to them. So they're really easy to find on YouTube. You just type in The Law for live audio wrestling. With The Law, you get an actual real radio show that comes out every Sunday, which I believe is on for 2 hours in Canada. I'm not the biggest fan of Don LaMouth Labransky and the other guy that does the show. I think they come off as sort of dicks to the callers when they call in. It doesn't matter what they call in about. These guys are lucky to have a radio show that people want to call into, and you can sort of tell that it's kind of real popular in its area. But they just always sort of bash the callers and sort of make it feel like, well, why did you even take the time to call them? But on this Sunday show, Dave Meltzer calls every day for about a 10-minute discussion about what's going on in the world of professional wrestling, sort of as a plug to the Wrestling Observer. It's always normally a pretty good discussion. So if you don't have a subscription to the Observer, this is one way to hear Dave Meltzer sort of shoot the shit about wrestling, and it's a fun way to get it. But John Pollock and Wei Ting host 2 different podcasts on this, which come out on Monday and on Tuesday nights. It's sort of, you can say it comes out on Tuesdays and on Wednesdays because it comes out so late. But there's Review a Raw and there's Review Away, which is basically like reviewing an old show. But they use a lot of clips from Raw, or they use a lot of clips from whatever they're reviewing. This week they reviewed the Jake the Snake Roberts documentary that really came out, or they normally will pick sort of like a pay-per-view from the past that sort of fits what's going on in the world of professional wrestling today. So those are always really good shows, and I like those. I saw John Pollock and Wei Ting twice at WrestleMania last year, and I treated them like they were really big celebrities because I like their shows and I listen to them all the time. Number 4 on the list is the Stone Cold podcast, as well as Austin Unleashed. These come out twice a week. You have to have a subscription to 2 different shows, but I linked them together on, I believe it's on Monday nights. The Austin podcast comes out, which is family friendly. The Austin Unleashed, I believe, downloads on Wednesday or on Thursday, and that's the one where he just throws out the kitchen sink. This show goes in waves for me. This time of year, Stone Cold Steve Austin is held up on his ranch in Texas, where he's taking care of the deers and things like this. So he doesn't have a way to really get out. He does a lot of shows just shooting the shit with his business partner on the ranch, and those shows are good. Sometimes they get drunk. Sometimes it's just them driving around looking at deers. And they get lost sort of talking about hunting. But, they also mix in mixed martial arts and a lot of wrestling. But Austin always finds a way to have a show where he just doesn't have anything planned and he has to rely on the fans. And he does a lot of Q&As where people will send him emails and he just answers the emails. Lately, he's been caught up in a craze where he's sort of watching matches on the WWE Network. And although I don't like the style that he does it. He doesn't say like, all right, press play and talk about the match. He likes to tell you to press play, and then he'll yell out pause, and he'll yell out a time where he'll stop and actually take his breath to sort of talk about what is the psychology of the match, which is really, really good, but does make it really hard to actually try and watch the match with him at the same time. But it is a good thing, even though the last one he did, which was on Rock versus Mankind on Monday Night Raw, where Mick Foley won the championship for the first time, and Stone Cold came out and got the historic, biggest pop in WWE history. He had to watch it on the Daily Motion, which is, YouTube's ugly stepbrother that lives in the backyard in a tool shed. But I thought it was funny. I don't know. I went looking for something on the WWE Network last night. I wanted to watch Halftime Heat, and I had a real trouble finding it on the Apple TV's WWE Network. So maybe it's just he couldn't find what he was looking for that fast in order to do the podcast. Number 3 is Cheap Heat. This honestly was my number 1 podcast last time, and this still is a really good podcast. I make sure I listen to this every day. But Cheap Heat, honestly, is a really, really good one with AKA the Masked Man, as well as Peter Rosenberg. You've got Greg I screwed up his name. Greg the Virgin Valentine as for the stat guy, what Reali was to PTI back in the day. This is really, really good, just rolling with the wrestling talk, and they're not insiders, they're fans. They've got friends that are in the wrestling business. Rosenberg is really good friends with Mark Henry. I'm sure that the Shoemaker has a lot of connections on the inside. But these are 2 guys that just get together normally on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and they're not afraid to bring up what they read on a dirt sheet. They're not afraid to bring up a wrestling rumor. They're not afraid to sound like idiots, sort of trying to fantasy book something. And that's why I like it so much, is that they're not coming off as just straight up smarks. They're wrestling fans like you and me. They want to know, they debate, whether if Hulk Hogan's going to be coming back. They debate if Shawn Michaels is going to be in the wrestling or in the WWE Royal Rumble. They're not afraid to sort of, take a wrestling rumor that most people will look at right away and just nonchalantly say that's not real, that's not going to happen, and they'll try and actually break it down and see if it's going to happen. That's why I like that show a lot. Number 2 is MLW. You can subscribe to this on iTunes, and they have a free version, which you get plenty of shows. You'll get 1 show from Jim Cornette. You'll get 1 show from MVP. You'll get the Conan and Court Bauer show, which is sort of like the flagship show of MLW. You'd get MSL with Kevin Sullivan from WCW, talking about WCW Nitro from back in the day. I really like Court Bauer, and with Court Bauer, you get Conan, and you would think like an old WCW guy having a podcast talking about wrestling today, it wouldn't be that connected. But Court Bauer still has a lot of connections within WWE from his days being a writer there. Conan is very connected with Lucha Underground as well as AAA. Really good friends with Rey Mysterio. Really good friends with Alberto Del Rio. And Conan has never been afraid to really shoot the shit and tell you, the real side of the story. He'll flat out tell you, this is what Rey Mysterio told me. This is what Alberto Del Rio told me. This is what's going on with this, and this is why this is going to happen. He doesn't hide behind, my sources told me, my friends told me. He just flat out tells you the truth. And if he doesn't like somebody, he comes out and he says it. You can subscribe to this one for $20 a year, not $20 a month. $20 1 year gets you a VIP, which gets you plenty of extra shows. They're called MLW VIP Extras, where Conan and Court Bauer will go through the mailbag, or they'll have an extra MVP show every week. They have an extra Jim Cornette show every week. I think that there's value in this. I subscribed to this to get their past shows when they had oh shit, what was my favorite show on there? Talkin' Shop with Machine Gun Carl Anderson, Rocky Romero, and the big LG, Luke Gallows, was on there. I wanted to get all of the older shows because they came into listening to it too late, and I feel like I've gotten my money's worth just for the MLW extras. Only $20 a year. These are the guys that's putting on Wale Mania. I find that that's a really good wrestling show that's going to come out. If the MLW flagship show with Conan and Court Bauer was a little bit more, it's not always on time. It doesn't always come out on Sunday, or it doesn't always come out on Monday. Sometimes it's not even once a week. If it was a little bit more consistent, honestly, I could see myself putting the Court Bauer show number one, because of the fact that how much I really like Court Bauer's style of doing a podcast and things like that. Number one is the Wrestling Observer with Wrestling Observer Radio, Wrestling Observer Live, the Brian and Vinny Show, Figure 4 Daily. Not only do you always get to hear Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez about 3 times, maybe even 4 times a week. They have a daily Wrestling Observer show, which is actually on like Real Radio, which they record and then they'll put up for subscribers to listen to. Every Thursday, Dave Meltzer is on to sort of plug what's in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, where he does like about a 10 to 15 minute deal going over the top stories of the week, or sometimes even the top stories of the day, because there's breaking news so much. But they always have like sort of a guest on each Wrestling Observer Live for the last 15 minutes. Sometimes if they get a really big name, they'll hold them over and do an hour podcast with them where they talk about, just a regular interview. But with this, if you're into MMA, you've got Dirty Tom Lawler, who talks a lot about wrestling as well, has a Monday show. Lance Storm has a show that's every other week with Brian Alvarez. You get the Brian and Vinny shows, where you get 3 of those shows a week. You get you get Tuesday, Thursday, and I guess it's on Sunday. Where you get, it's called Retro Raw and Retro Nitro, where on Tuesdays they'll review a show from 19 years ago, where they're going through the Monday Night Wars. And right now the Monday Night Raw stuff is getting really good, because they're really starting to build up Sean and Brett, where they're going to get to the You Screwed Brett with the whole screw job in Montreal. That's really fun. Every Thursday, you get the Granny Show, which is what I'm listening to right now, where it's actually Brian Alvarez and his grandma, and she's been getting into the WWE Network and trying to find one wrestling show a week, which she's going to review. She actually reviewed the Royal Rumble last week, which was actually pretty fun. But those are my top 5. You've got The Law, you've got the Austin Unleashed, as well as the Stone Cold Podcast, you've got Cheap Heat, MLW, and the Wrestling Observer. You got those 5 on your iTunes playlist. You're going to be good to go for wrestling podcasts.